Hey everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Today, Lurrus Countercat. So Countercat has been a deck in Modern that's been around essentially since the beginning of Modern, back in 2011. And it's evolved a lot over time. Early on it was called Temur Delver, and since then it's obviously become more robust, more sophisticated. It's essentially a tempo deck, a 4-color tempo deck in most instances, and yeah, it never saw a higher tier play. It's a very skill intensive deck to play. It's not a bad deck, it's actually a very powerful deck. It just usually requires skilled pilots and a very good understanding not only of the deck, but of all the other decks in Modern, or at least the main decks in Modern and how they play. So that's probably why, at least in my opinion, it doesn't see more widespread play. It's just it requires a lot more skill, but I really like that. And you've heard me say similar about Temur Delver, and Temur Delver is a tempo deck. It is a skill-intensive deck. It's very rewarding when you play it well. Countercat is a deck you play when you think Temur Delver is not, punishing and skill-intensive enough, because Countercat is definitely a deck you need to wrap your mind around. I really love this deck, and I'm really happy to be showing it or sharing it with you guys today to a wider audience. I've made some adjustments to the deck. To date, I don't think anyone in the Countercat community has played with Lurrus as a companion, so I think Lurrus as a companion works really well in this deck, although we're not abusing any non-creature permanents in the deck. It's perfectly fine as a mid to late game creature to come into the battlefield, hopefully gain us some life, but more importantly allow us to cast a creature or two that we've lost along the way from our graveyard. That really would help us out. It's really helpful in our tempo plan, and I think it fits perfectly well. It required no adjustments to the deck at all to fit Lurrus in, apart from losing one sideboard slot, which I think is okay. So yeah, Lurrus has really worked out really well for me. I don't think I'm going to be playing Countercat in the future without Lurrus of the Dream Den being there, unless some 3 CMC permanent becomes a must. Lurrus is probably going to be a good addition. So let's move on to the core to give you an idea of what Countercat is all about. So not surprisingly, Delver of Secrets, like I said, it was originally Temur Delver. So of course you're playing 4 of those, and of course you're playing Wild Temur, which is, it's still an awesome card. It's still an awesome creature. At most it's a 3/3, and that's fine. Early game, turn 1 or not turn 1, but turn 2, it's going to be a 3/3, most likely, and it's just swinging in for 3 every turn when you can. And believe it or not, it wins games. It's just how it is. You'd be surprised. And of course you have Tarmogoyf as a 4 of. Of course, Tarmogoyf. Why would I not be playing a deck with Tarmogoyf? If I can, I will. The other creatures, now, every Countercat player is going to be playing with a different formulation of creatures apart from the core. In my case, I really want to be trying out Dreadhorde Arcanist. So Dreadhorde Arcanist has been making the rounds in the Delver community recently, and I think it fits perfectly fine into a deck like this, where it's mostly playing 1 mana spells. So the ability to recast those spells from the graveyard every time Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks is actually very powerful, and we'll be getting to those spells soon, and I'll be making commentary as we go along. But Dreadhorde Arcanist works really well here as a 3 of. Usually if you're not playing Dreadhorde Arcanist, you're playing some number of Hooting Mandrills or something else, but I think Dreadhorde Arcanist is really, really awesome here. It's really pulled its weight in the Countercat matches that I've been playing with. So yeah, awesome card. So let's move on to the Cantrips. Speaking of 1 CMC spells, they're all 1 CMC, so keep that in mind. Serum Visions, of course, Serum Visions. Sleight of Hand is a 3 of, and Opt is a 3 of, so I'm just doing a split between the two. You can play around with these numbers. You can cut maybe 1 Opt and 1 Sleight of Hand and play some other spell if you really want to as well. Those numbers can be adjusted as you see fit. I found that these numbers worked well, but again, if you want maybe slightly less cantrips, maybe more removal, you can do that. If you want to cut some of your cantrips and add more permission, you can do that. The spells in this deck can definitely be tweaked to your playstyle or your meta or whatever you want to try out with Countercat. But yeah, so Sleight of Hand and Opt, I don't really need to get too in-depth about these cards. Sleight of Hand is nice to have an option between 1 of 2 cards, and Opt, you're scrying and drawing, so works perfectly fine. The removal. So yeah, the removal is always fun in Countercat because you are playing with 4 colors. We are red, blue, green, and white. Path to Exile is, you know, one of the best removals in Magic, or at least in Modern, I should say. And, you know, being able to exile a creature gets around indestructible, and just, yeah, gets rid of any creature of any size, which is always nice. You don't have that ability in Temur, at least not easily, and definitely not for 1 mana. So Path to Exile really makes it, you know, a no-brainer. And of course, and I've done that, and I think you're going to see it in the matches today, Dreadhorde Arcanist can recast Path to Exile. So, you know, you can path, main phase, attack, path again, get rid of your opponent's creatures, essentially, or their blockers, and you could attack in for the kill, or just attack for more damage, whatever it may be. So, Path to Exile is works pretty well there. Lightning Bolt, well, it's Lightning Bolt, and of course, I don't have to tell you that Lightning Bolt, Dreadhorde Arcanist Lightning Bolt, is a very nice play. So, yeah, Lightning Bolt, 4 of. Lightning Helix, so depending on the deck, depending on the formulation of the deck, you could play any number of these. Older versions of the deck played 4. Since then, a lot of bannings have changed the numbers of Lightning Helixes you want to play. I think 2 is fine. I wish I could play 4. I really tried to make it 4, but I needed to spread the pain a bit in terms of, you know, how many lands I need to fetch for immediately and shock myself for. And I'm going to be getting to the mana base very soon. You're going to see what I'm talking about. I think 2 is fine. I'll probably up the number in future iterations of Lurrus Countercat, but for this iteration, especially with Dreadhorde Arcanist, 2 is perfectly fine. I want as many options for Dreadhorde Arcanist as possible. So permission, nothing for Dreadhorde Arcanist here. Let's just get that out of the way. 2 mana leak, 3 force negation, 2 spell snare. This can be modified as you see fit. I really strongly suggest you play with force of negation. If you can't afford them, maybe Disrupting Shoals, but Disrupting Shoals means you might have to tweak your other cards a bit as well to make sure you have enough blue. But definitely you want to play with Force of Negation, because again, at the end of the day, we are a tempo deck, and you want to maintain your tempo, and being able to be efficient with your resources is always important, and Force of Negation allows you to, you know, use up more of your resources and not necessarily hold it up. For example, Mana Leak requires you to hold up 2 mana, you know, because you're anticipating your opponent casting something on their turn or at some point. Whereas Force of Negation, you can tap out, and as long as your opponent doesn't cast anything on your turn, you're good. So keep that in mind when you're playing Force of Negation and figuring out if you want to, you know, shell out money for it. But yeah, you can play around with these numbers a bit. You could, you know, Spell Snare is a card I don't like playing with often. I'm very not pro cards like Spell Snare where they counter a specific CMC spell or a specific type of card. Yeah, it's just not my thing, especially when it's very, you know, very small pool of cards that it focuses on. But in Modern, 2 is, you know, pretty common, and I think right now in the current meta, you were seeing plenty of two CMC spells that we want to get rid of. So Spell Snare works pretty well. It's worked pretty well for me. If you don't like Spell Snare, you could play Spell's Pierce, or you could up the number of mana leaks and Force of Negations. It's your call, but you probably want a 1 mana counter spell somewhere in the 60, and I think Spell Snare right now works pretty well. So if I'm saying that, it probably means it's even better than I say it is. Alright, so the lands. It looks like we're playing a lot of lands, which we are, but there's only 18 of them overall. So the mana base in Countercat is very painful, both in your wallet and for your life total. That's just how it is. It's just, you know, the realities of Countercat, and it's the realities of Temur Delver as well. When you see me do the deck text for Temur Delver, I always tell you, you know, go fetch and go shock. You need your mana right away. It's part of the game. It's part of the game plan. Pretty much the same holds true for Countercat. It's part of the game plan. You need to manage your resources efficiently, including your health, but you need the mana that you need to cast your spells. Now, I go a step further here. Is I'm playing a few more shocks than most Countercat players prefer, in particular Sacred Foundry. So, you know, I've gotten this feedback already from other Countercat players that I shared this deck with before I recorded this deck. And, you know, they made similar comments. I've spoken to other people. They made similar comments about Sacred Foundry. Usually they don't play Sacred Foundry because it's producing white-red, and white-red are very much secondary colors to blue-white in the deck. Blue-green in the deck. But, yeah, I disagree. When you are playing a deck like this, and this is something, you know, I'm pretty much consistent with this and everything I've ever said about lands, your mana base should be able to produce whatever lands you need or whatever land combination you need whenever you need it. And for me to be able to do that, I need to play 6 shock lands. I don't know what to tell you. I know it's kind of crazy, but it's true. So I'm playing 1 Breeding Pool, 1 Hallowed Fountain, 1 Sacred Foundry, 1 Steam Vents, 1 Stomping Ground, and 1 Temple Garden. Yeah, one of each. So don't lose them when you fetch for them. Make sure you protect them. Oh, I'm just kidding. If you lose them, it's okay. You usually have an alternate, but this is how it is. So depending on your opening hand, depending on the lands you start with in your opening hand, and depending on what spells you need to cast, fetch accordingly. You pretty much have every option available to you, and your fetches can more or less get you any shock that you need. So yeah, that's how I sculpted the mana base. Nothing too crazy, nothing too innovative, except for the Sacred Foundry, which seems to be more a taboo than anything else. But I think the mana base works well. Then you have some number of fetches, of course: 2 Wooded Foothills, 1 Flooded Strand, 4 Misties, and 2 Scalding Tarns. These numbers are not necessarily random. They're based upon the types of lands you'd want to get. In particular, the types of basics you want to get as well. So keep that in mind. That's why they're there in those numbers. And of course, I'm playing 3 basics. So 1 forest, 1 island, and 1 plains. Obviously, I don't need a mountain here. Not really necessary. Usually, if I'm being cut off from red, I'll survive. These are here, again, to give you painless options for fixing your mana base. So maybe your 3rd, 4th, 5th land can be basics as opposed to shocks, and you save yourself some pain there. It's really the main idea. Also, you need targets for Path to Exile or Ghost Quarter or Field of Ruin or whatever, so it's always good to place some number of basics there as well. And, especially with a greedy mana base like this, your opponents will definitely be targeting it, so you want replacement options for it, and these 3 have come in pretty handy. So, sideboard. Yeah, sideboard, obviously, I'm always going to say this, sideboards change all the time, so this is what I ended up with, but, it might change after this recording. 3 Veil of Summer, of course, I pretty much use that same, shot in every one of my deck techs, because it doesn't really change. Dovin's Veto, I actually stole the idea from, I stole that tech idea from someone else in the Temur community, or the Temur Delver community, I should say. I saw him playing in one of his counter cat list, and I was like, oh yeah, right, we're playing white. we could play something a bit more greedy than Negate. Now I'm not a fan, because Negate, at least it's 1 blue and a colorless, so I could keep any other color up apart from blue, and apart from blue and some other color. Dovin's Veto requires you to keep blue and white up, but it's nice because it can't be countered, which is relevant in today's meta. So yeah, let's play Dovin's Veto, 2 of instead of 2 negates. Let's do it. Then I'm playing a Deglamour alongside Unravel the Aether and a Sudden Shock. So I should have probably put those in order on the screen. Those splits are basically there for Heliod right now, the Heliod combo decks. So I'm playing, the Glamour and Unravel the Aether are essentially the same card. They're just different names. And, when you could play cards like that, with the exact same effects but different names, might as well, up your micro percentages there just a bit. And then Sudden Shock, of course, also works against the Heliod decks and stopping it ideally. So yeah, as you can see, I'm devoting quite a bit of space for Heliod, but Unravel the Aether and Deglamour also come in handy for other decks playing artifacts and enchantments. So they're not perfect because they don't destroy the artifact or enchantment, but in this case, especially in Heliod's case, we can't destroy the enchantment that we want to destroy, so these are better options. I'm also playing 2 Cleansing Wildfire because I still want to be able to attack my opponent's mana base, so Cleansing Wildfire could come in handy there. And Engineer Explosives, you are playing 4 colors, so you could essentially get rid of anything, or most things in Modern, that are up to 4 CMC. So yeah, 2 Engineering Explosives, pretty awesome. And 2 Surgical Extractions. I'm still hedging against Graveyard Strategy. Surgical Extraction comes in handy there. Or against combo decks, which there are plenty of. If you manage to kill off a combo piece, surgically extract it, and then it's probably game over. So that's why I like it here. And of course, it can be recast with Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is handy. Alright, the matchups. Well, the matchups are going to be pretty similar to Temur Delver decks, except that I have to take into account that we're playing a slightly more painful mana base, which does affect some matchups. So when it comes to combo, in particular spell-based combo, we're usually okay. We could, apply pressure pretty early on in the game and continue that pressure throughout the game. And hopefully close out the game quicker than combo can close us out, and we have a permission package to slow them down. It does require you to draw the correct amount of cards. You might have to rely on your sideboard in game 2 and 3 to bring in even more permission. Maybe remove some removal from your main to be able to shore up more permission and counter their spells, or bring in Veil of Summers if necessary. But yeah, I think we could. I was able to deal with most of the spell-based combo decks that I played pretty well. If you're playing against creature-based combo like Heliod or Primetime, well, things get a bit more difficult. Obviously, against Primeval Titan decks, you're gonna bring in your Cleansing Wildfires to ideally get rid of Cavern of Souls, or some other lands that you want to target. Slow down your opponent. Save your mana leaks for your Primeval Titans if there's no Cavern of Souls on the battlefield. And just apply pressure as much as possible to beat out the game. I believe there was one game I played against Scape Shift. I don't remember if it was for this deck, but yeah, or at least for this iteration of the deck, I should say. But yeah, again, these combo decks are doable because you can apply pressure, keep up the mana for permission, and you're good to go. You don't have too much in the way of creatures you need to worry about, so it's pretty much an open field for you to just attack every turn and close out the game. So I like that about combo decks. When it comes to aggro, it's a different story. Now you are playing plenty of removal, which is going to be great. You're playing Lightning Bolts, you're playing Path to Exiles, you're playing Lightning Helix. The main issue here is your mana base is going to be hurting you a bit more than usual. You're playing a 4-color deck, and it's just going to be a bit more difficult against aggro decks. You're going to have to play diligently. Your opening hand, the 7-card hand that you pick is going to have to be very good. It can't be greedy. You're going to really rely on Lightning Helix and Lurrus to gain you that much needed health to keep you alive for a turn or two extra. And if you can get to those spells and cast them and gain the life off of them, I think your aggro matchups are pretty decent. But aggro decks can definitely swarm you and get the better of you really quickly. So I don't think aggro is the perfect matchup or the best matchup for this deck. It's definitely doable, but you need to be very comfortable with the deck and need to be very comfortable with playing against aggro. That's just how it is. Rely on your permission, rely on your removal, and hope that you draw well enough to keep up with aggro, and then you can win. Because once you remove all of aggro's threats, and they're on 1 or 2 lands at 1 or 2 cards in hand at most, they start running out of gas, and then that's when you can come back and take them out. Because at the end of the day, your creatures are going to be bigger for the most part. So yeah, that's really going to be your strategy with aggro. Make sure you control early game, and then go aggro late game. Big mana decks. So nothing much here specifically targeting big mana decks. If you're playing against Tron in particular, you do have removal. So if you're playing against Eldrazi Tron, your matchup is actually pretty good. If you're playing against just straight up Tron, playing mostly Karn and Ugin and all that, slightly more difficult. You'll probably have to rely on, again, your permission to counter those spells, counter those planeswalkers, and then just plow through. So, again, it's going to be a race. If they have natural Tron turn 3, going to be difficult, unless, of course, you have the permission to stop them. You will be relying on your sideboard quite heavily, bringing in Dovin's Veto, bringing in Cleansing Wildfire, bringing in Deglamor even, getting rid of, or Unravel the Aether as well, getting rid of, whatever artifacts they might bring in. And actually it's nice to get rid of Wormcoil Engine without destroying it, because when you destroy Wormcoil Engine, it splits off into 2. But if you just remove it from the battlefield and put it back into your graveyard, put it back into your library, well, you you get to live another turn. So you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You just have to be able to sideboard intelligently. Not magic. Well, I'm thinking of removing not magic from these matchup analysis, because it just wastes time. If you're playing against Dredge, which isn't too prevalent in the meta, but it's there. It's popping up, and I feel like it's going to be pushed a bit more soon. It's a race. It really is a race against Dredge. It's a crapshoot. It's a roll of the die. If they falter, you're good. If they have the nuts, you're dead. And for most degenerate decks, it's essentially like that. Degenerate decks are on the decline, luckily, since we got Simian Spear Guide banned. so that's a bonus. But yeah, if you're playing, if there's a lot of dredge at your local store or wherever you play, or you just find that you're running into dredge a lot online, then up your dredge hate in the sideboard. That's your best option. All right, so control. You do pretty well against control. I'm pretty comfortable against control matchups. Again, your main board has permission, your sideboard has more permission and has Veil of Summer, so you have a lot to lean on to deal with control. And even the Stoneblade decks, you can deal with them pretty well. You have a lot of tools here. Remember, you have Path to Exile. You could path whatever they bring in. You have removal. You have Dreadhorde Arcanist to bring back those paths and those lightning bolts. So you could really go in lockstep with control. So I'm really comfortable with those matchups. I'm not going to say I'm looking for those matchups, but when they do come, I play around their permission and I get through. So yeah, control matchups are actually pretty good with Countercat. You can pretty much go a long way, and you can grind with the deck pretty well. So yeah, I like the control matchups quite a bit. Lastly, mid-range decks, which are still around and they're popping back up now with Uro gone. Yeah, listen, like I said, you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You have white, access to white, which gives you mainly access to Path to Exile, and to a lesser extent Lightning Helix. Those will help you out in these games. They will help you grind out. They will help you get rid of, opposing Tarmogoyfs or whatever opposing creatures that your opponents are throwing at you. And like I said, Dreadhorde Arcanist will pull its weight there. At worst, Dreadhorde Arcanist will be a Lightning Bolt, or a Lightning Rod for your opponent's removal, so your other creatures can get through, like your Delver of Secrets, your Tarmogoyf, or your Wild Nacatl. So yeah, mid-range decks, I actually don't mind. You can grind pretty well, and the games usually get better with sideboards. So mid-range is a pretty good matchup. And that's it for Lurrus Countercat. I really love this deck. Like I said, it's Temur Delver on steroids, because you're adding a fourth color, you're adding more dimensions to the deck, and just making it more fun to play, more difficult to play, more frustrating to play. But it is a very good deck once you do master it. But like I said, it's a deck that's very skill intensive and requires you to really manage your resources. But decks like this also help you refine your skill as a Magic player and as a Modern player. And don't forget that. That's something I mentioned many times before. I started off with like black-white tokens in Modern, which was very, very easy to play deck, and not necessarily very powerful, but it could win you some games. And then, I went through some other decks and I decided, I'm just going to play Temur Delver, which is extremely skill intensive. I was really horrible with it at the beginning, but it really forced me to become a better player. And now, I am what I am. So these are the types of decks that I would sometimes suggest you play, maybe not go all in on in terms of spending all your money, but if you have the pieces, put it together and try it out, practice. Even if you don't, get to the amount of wins you want to get to with Lurrus Countercat, you will realize that you are becoming a better player just by playing it and mastering the deck. So keep that in mind. If you enjoyed the deck, let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit notification bell, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, share my content on Twitter and Facebook and all the other social media. All the stuff I just said goes really, really long way for me in the channel. I really, really appreciate it. For you, it takes a couple seconds. For me, I can't put a value on all those clicks. So would really appreciate it. If you want to go a step further and support me on Patreon, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. My Patreon community is slowly growing, and I love it. I appreciate every one of you. Check out the tiers. Basically, there are patron rewards that I give out at the end of every year. They're guaranteed, so it's not some sort of lottery. You get basically some of your money back in form of magic cards. So check that out. Thanks, and have a good one.